Right. Now, joining us on Planet America is the former Democratic mayor of the great city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Mayor Tom Murphy. He's in Australia to attend the Next City Symposium, hosted by the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Mr Mayor, welcome to the program.
Well, I'm glad to be here, or I don't know if I'm glad to be here listening to that conversation.
Actually, can we start off? What do you think of what we just said? You know more than we do.
No, you know more than I do about some of the quotes. I mean, probably there's no place more dramatic in the change than New York City. In the early 90s and 80s, the homicide rate in New York City hit almost 2,500 people in 1 year were murdered. It is now that New York has been ranked since Rudy Giuliani became mayor and decided to change that, and continues under Bloomberg is the safest city per capita in America. And the homicide rate has probably dropped below 400 people. Now, let me think about that. 400 people. That you probably don't have that many people being murdered in all of Australia.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and that's one city.
Yeah.
The murder rate in Pittsburgh, which is amongst the
one
lower,
of the lowest, right?
Yeah, and it's certainly below the national average. It's still about 5 times that of Sydney.
We cut our when I was becoming mayor in the mid-90s, as your graph showed, our homicide rate was about 100 people being murdered in a year, and we were able to cut that down by half to about 50.
Yeah, why?
We learned a lot from what was going on in New York. It's a combination of technology, and it's thinking about how you're going to police. Instead of police historically reacted to a crime, somebody gets shot and the police respond to that crime. So you begin to think about how do you proactively get in front of that before it happens.
So this is the whole time in New York of the whole broken windows theory.
Yeah, and it really is a whole different way, and the ability to create real time. It was called Comstead, and it's in movies and TV shows, which was how you track that crime in real time, so that if there's a shooting that happens in one neighborhood, the odds are there's going to be a retaliation to that. Overwhelmingly, these homicides are not random, but they are directed. Around drugs and other things like that.
So you think it's a policing issue more than, say, a social issue or an economic issue?
No, it's both. I mean, the police have to respond to whatever context they're in, and you can either react to it or you try to proactively get it under control. It's a social issue, and I think it really speaks in part to the culture, a difference in culture between Australia and America, where we put huge emphasis on individual rights. We do it we believe we have a God-given right to carry guns and to do what we want with our land. And you have a different culture, which I think sort of puts the community value at a higher level than individual rights in terms of how you think about how people live together. And I think that is an important difference in how we review it. Now, as a mayor of a city, we wanted gun control, and we were stripped of the ability to. We had some gun controls, reporting requirements and such, and many cities did. And the state's legislature and the federal government, through the Congress, stripped us of the ability to do our own. I'll give you one simple example. Probably 15 to 20% of the guns we were taking off the street, and when we get a gun from somebody, most often not registered or licensed to that person, we try to figure out where it came from. And about 20% of the guns we're taking off the street, we track it back to somebody who bought it, if we can, and they will say, well, it was stolen. But they'd never reported it. Yeah. Why didn't they report it? Because it wasn't stolen. They were able to buy the gun legally and sell it to a 15-year-old kid for 4 or 5 times more than what they paid for it. And so we've tried to get them to get a law in that basically say if your gun's stolen, you need to report it within 10 days.
How do you work with when the mentality of certainly a lot of people, it seems, in places like Aurora, we saw the stat of 40% increase in sales of guns since the shooting, when the counter-argument is to say, well, if only somebody in that cinema had a handgun in their jacket, they could have taken this guy down. They could have ended it earlier.
Ignoring the Kevlar.
Of course, ignoring the Kevlar. But that's the reaction of fair-minded people.
I mean, so you want in a full theater to begin to have a shootout?
Yeah.
I mean, does that even make any sense?
But to them, it is entirely logical. Conservatives see that as the logical next step, not to take the guns away from people, but to make sure more people have guns so that fair-minded people can intervene.
In an incident like that, train people, police officers or soldiers, in the chaos of an incident like that, the odds of them coolly pulling out their gun and shooting the bad guy without getting anybody else who's running around in front of them, I mean, and particularly now, maybe you have 20 people in the theater with guns who all pull them out and start shooting, right? I mean, it just, the idea of it is just, for me, ludicrous that if we all carry guns, if there's a bad guy somewhere in a crowd of people who tries to do something bad, we can all shoot them.
Which is why
doesn't even make any sense.
You're a Democrat, I guess. It is one of those fundamental finding issues.
I appreciate why people want to have guns, and lots of hunters. In fact, in Pennsylvania, the first day of hunting season, there was no school.
Yeah. Now, let's
True story. True.
Is that because people are worried their kids are going to get shot?
Because kids, I mean, they want to go. This is part of the ritual growing up. They all want to go hunting, right?
Now, let's talk about some happier sort of issues. Your city of Pittsburgh is held up as one of the most livable cities in the United States. And it really came back from the brink as a Rust Belt city.
More than the brink. It was over the brink.
It was over the brink. It's come back. How do you do that, and what are the lessons for other cities that have seen that sort of industrial base of last century discipline?
You have Newcastle here, and I think some cities maybe to the south of Sydney that I've been told, and I've not been there, are undergoing the same kind of sort of
heavy industry leaving.
Let me give you, just frame it. Between 1970 and 1990, Pittsburgh lost 500,000 people, left the region, moved to Florida or Texas because literally the steel industry, which was the center of manufacturing in the United States, was in full-scale decline. It sort of disappeared pretty much. And so we were faced with how do you rebuild it? And your question is, it is about how do you mobilize the leadership, the citizens, the civic, not just the political, but the civic leadership. And what's the competitive advantage you have? Every city has some competitive advantages. We saw our universities as an opportunity, and universities were there. They'd been there for 100 years. As you have wonderful universities, the University of Sydney being one. I spent a lot of time there. And my sense is that because you've not faced the challenges we have, that the universities don't play the same kind of role as economic engines. And so if you go to Pittsburgh today, there are hundreds of companies in Pittsburgh that grew out of the research, of commercializing the research at the university. Google has 1,000 people working in Pittsburgh because they are connected with the university research.
So it all starts with education.
It all starts with education, but it also starts with how you get the university to expand their role beyond education and research to think about themselves as economic drivers.
Well, Tom Murphy, it's nice of you to stop by for a chat while you're in town.
I'd love to listen to you guys. Why aren't you syndicated in America?
You can watch us online.
Yeah, you ought to get there on PBS, really.
Good to see you.
Thank you. It's nice seeing you.